All units 10-3. It now appears as though shots are being fired. All officers use caution. It has been confirmed. Suspects are armed and are firing at police.
6-0 on the air. Northwest Signal 10. Building fire. Headquarters. Northwest Signal Fire Department. 1000 North Broadway. Towards North Park Drive in North Albany.
Multiple explosions coming from 661. Unable to get any ambulance, any rig out except the 667. Automatically go to a third alarm.
Welcome to Scanner School. My name is Phil Lichtenberger, and this podcast is here to teach you everything to know about the scanner radio hobby. And that is our mission here today. And as always, to transfer knowledge from whether it's me or a guest who happens to show up on the podcast, and to pass that knowledge over to you, to teach you something new, something a little bit interesting, maybe something even different that you can do with the scanner radio hobby so that you can try something a little bit new or maybe pique an interest that you didn't know that you yet had with the hobby. And on this week's podcast, we are talking to McRadioface. Yes, you've heard that one absolutely correctly. McRadioface prefers to keep things a little bit anonymous. Now, Mr. McRadioface is here to talk about searching, seeking, and finding anomalies while scanning. This could include pirate radio stations, unlicensed transmitters, or even using information that you have from current events to know where and what to listen to. McRadioface takes hunting these random transmissions very seriously, and his setup that he tells us about proves just how serious he is about finding all of these oddball transmissions that are out there. And many of these can be found in the VHF and UHF spectrum that we typically monitor with our scanner radios. So there's a couple of great stories and a couple of great examples as to how being prepared or being fully aware of the spectrum or the RF landscape as it stands today and how it changes on a particular day or event can then bring, a little bit of interest to you as to what it is that can be different, right? Because we don't know what we don't know. So if we don't know what is different today than yesterday, then we'll never know that this is something that we should be paying attention to. So the advice today is to familiarize yourself with the RF landscape that is around you, right? Based on what you then understand, that helps you find something that is different. For example, we're all familiar with our kitchens, right? We know where the coffee pot is, where the toaster is, where the utensils are stored, where the dishes, the plates, all that lives in our kitchen. But if somebody were to add something new, maybe you get a bread maker or, some weird new device that's out there in the market, an air fryer, and all of a sudden it shows up on your countertop, right? That's new. That's different. That didn't belong there yesterday. This is like a real world tangible example as to the RF landscape that's around you, right? Knowing where things are and where they belong and where they should be, and then something different shows up, that's where we want to draw our focus to. This is what McRadioface has extreme knowledge on, is finding these oddballs. He's going to tell us today and share with us how he finds them, how he categorizes them, and again, what he is exactly looking for. So I'm not going to spill his thunder or explain anything else for him because he does a very great job at doing that. I really did enjoy this conversation that I had. It was definitely something different that we haven't had on the podcast before. So I am very excited to introduce to you and welcome to today's session, Mr. McRadioface. McRadioface, really interesting to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's a wonderful opportunity to get the word out there. I'm grateful to have people diversify and get out and do different things to get the word out.
Yeah, excellent. So a little bit of your background before we start into the topic today. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I started doing radio when I was a kid. I got a gift from my mom, and it just kind of went downhill from there. I started modifying radios and used them to kind of branch out and do information security type stuff because I learned how to hack radios. I thought, heck, hey man, how hard could it be to hack something else? And that knowledge transferred directly into information security career. So I did that for a very long time. I still do that now, and I gave a break to radios because the technology didn't catch up to where my brain was, and finally we had computer controlled radios. Now I could get back and invest into this thing because I had all these clunky boat anchors hanging around that were just gathering dust, and I would just long for the day we can control these things with a computer, and here we are.
Right. I think technology finally caught up to you. So what is it that you typically monitor?
I'm mostly like an anomalous radio type of guy. I like, maybe things that aren't supposed to be there.
Okay.
You develop a baseline of things that are supposed to be there, and then when these little things pop up, you kind of look into them and discover and find there's the whole another substrata of radio out there that's just fascinating, like pirates and outband communications, people using radio where they're not supposed to generally, and doing things maybe that are, maybe not necessarily on the up and up or skirting regulations with increased power or transmitting on frequencies they're not supposed to. This is a fascinating thing to me, and I'm one of those guys. I like to catalog that stuff just because it's there, and so I've done that ever since I started doing this.
Excellent. And that's speaking volumes to what I like to do also, right? Because I always like to say, like, the secrets are in the searches. It's when you look a little bit beyond just what's publicly out there on databases and web forms and stuff like that, right? When you go out there and you tune the dial yourself, or you hit the search button and you look for something that's out there. And I think my first example with that was, here on Long Island, there's a ton of fishing boats that go out every single night from one of these the southern tiers or southern boating state parks, and you can listen to them if you monitor just north of the VHF marine frequencies. So they're kind of like not where they're supposed to be. They're just one tick outside of there. At least that's where they used to be. But they give all these different fishing reports to each other, and they were talking about the people they have on board and what kind of activity they have basically on their own ship for that night. So exactly right. Just finding out what's out there and what really shouldn't be there is definitely very interesting and very easy to do.
And now take that, what you've experienced there, on a more or less regional or local kind of level, and amp it up to where you've scaled it to where like a more or less a hemispheric type of a scale, or like a global scale. And now we're talking about HF radio, where these long distance communications can come into play. And you got these propagation anomalies that kind of help you sometimes. And if you know how propagation works, you can kind of guess where the good hot bands are going to be. You can park for the night and record your stuff and play it back the next day. And so, I mean, it gives you plenty of opportunity to find these anomalous transmissions. They're all over the place.
Is that typically where you focus on? Do you focus on the HF bands and shortwave listening, or are you like DC to daylight kind of guy?
I am a DC to daylight guy. I mean, I like to think that I run a SIGINT, like a professional level signal intelligence shop, but like a one man guy. I run it as a hobby. I try to simulate as much as I can a professional level shop, but just as a hobbyist. So, I have recordings, I archive them, and I try to label them, and I try to stay on top of it as much as like a professional organization would. So, I've done this with anomalous transmissions for a very, very long time. Back in the day when we were, first dealing with those numbers transmissions on HF.
And you used, I guess, back in those days, just a Vox tape recorder, just to.
Yeah, that's all. We had to go speaker into, microphone. Just that analog gap that we had to deal with. And then later on, we were able to, craft wires and hack little junctions together and record directly out of a radio.
Gotcha. Now, for anybody that doesn't understand or hasn't been experienced with it, can you run by what a numbers station is?
Oh, well, for example, I mean, the first number stations were done well before I was born, but I mean, for like the Spanish number stations, like where spy numbers transmissions that are done, the rumor is, and well established, that these transmissions are done on HF and they're sent out to spies out in the field, that to give them messages to do things or not do things. And these have been going on for a very long time. And they're very, very odd sounding and very cryptic and mysterious. And a lot of leverage is given to them in times of war. And people monitor them and listen for changes in their transmissions and different metadata. They track them down with different applications and try to decipher the communications, which can't be done. They're cryptographically secure. One-time pads. As a kid, you learned that. I did anyway. I tried to crack them and spent years trying to crack that stuff. And later on, as learning math, I realized that stuff's a one-time pad and it's cryptographically secure. You're not going to crack it, in any kind of meaningful way. So that's why it's done on the radio, like in that format.
Exactly. But again, the information is given in the clear. It's just that you have no way of decoding what it is. You have no decoder ring basically to put it back.
Right. And you need that decoder ring, and then the spies in the field will have them.
Right. They better have it.
Yeah.
So, and that's cool though, right? Because that's basically a one-way transmission, and like you said, it's whoever is using it, whether it's spies or special ops or something like that. And it's interesting to think that it's a to do or not to do kind of thing, or like you should be going to this location, or you shouldn't be terminating somebody.
Right. The concept of a dead man switch. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Like a canary.
Right. So what kind of equipment are you using right now, or have you used in order to sniff out all these pirate stations, or just things that you like to listen to?
It's a constant juggling of hardware and software and peripherals. What are the best kind of cables? This cable sucks. It heats up and you lose it, you gain impedance and you lose packets, and you got to throw it out because it leaks RF and it leaks into your other radio. So basically it's an ongoing thing, the kind of equipment always changing, but basically I control my main SDRs now, my main radios, I control them with a Windows facility, a Windows laptop. And I used to control everything with Linux, but the software was a little bit buggy and more stuff came out for Windows I was able to use, and that seemed more flexible at the time. And so I use Windows to use for my radios. And I got several radios from SDR Play, RSP-1A and the RSP Duo, and my scanners, the Uniden Bearcat BC536HP. And I've got a couple other SDRs laying around, gathering dust, a net SDR and an SDR IQ. And I'll probably get some more stuff as time goes on. I've got a bunch of those little thumbsticks.
Right.
RTL,
you gotta start
SDR
somewhere,
deals.
right? Yeah.
Yes. And, so HF is not the only thing. I do go to DC to daylight. There is some satellite stuff as well. And I do a lot of ADSB. For many years, I collected ADSB in my area.
Okay.
And I had a huge database of stuff incoming and going in my area, which is a very interesting area to be in. I live near Washington, D.C. So, I have ADSB straight out of the horse's mouth, I guess you'd call it.
Excellent. So that's just your own receiver basically running on something like a Raspberry Pi with Piware or something like that? Or was it something a little bit more?
I had that tailed off of one of the receivers on my RSP Duo.
Oh, okay.
And I had a bunch of ADSB stuff hanging off that. And I was processing it. I was processing that with some Linux stuff I was hanging off the back end there for archiving and compressing and doing little graphical things. I was building a dashboard so I could pipe the output into a remote Linux station and have a nice little dashboard, stand up wherever I was. I could just telnet to the port and have the data automatically set. It was just a little thing I had going. And having open source was a great help in that. There's some things you can control by sending commands to a port, and then you can write your own little programs like scanners and things like that outside of the realm of having to compile things and getting involved with C++ and junk like that. It was much easier to work with GQRX in Linux, for example. You can pipe commands directly to it. You can write your own kind of little batch commands and have your own hellacious little time. I've been doing that. You see, I got that, and I got a series of antennas outside, some Black Knight antennas I had shipped in from the UK. Those guys are great. And I have a homebrew ADSB antenna that I made. That's hanging outside. And I got my HF stuff. I got a mag loop from DX Engineering, and I got I got about 1.5 miles of long wire out back. That's all in different configurations. It looks like a cyber spider web.
Wow.
It makes my neighbors nuts because they have to go out there and look at it. And I got to say, I'm sorry, man, but it's tuned. I can't tell you how many times I can't move any of that stuff.
Right. Unbelievable. So I guess it zigzags back and forth across the yard then, right? So the spiders love it, but
it's a little unsightly. Well, I mean, there's one big cyber spider that loves it.
Very nice. I always wondered, like, because I've got a really small piece of property here, and I try to make do with what I have, but I get very jealous when I hear people who something like you're listening to the world on HF, and all I can really hear is noise. So to be able to hear what you're picking up with just random wire and everything else is very interesting. I always imagine how much easier it would be if you had a large piece of property, right? You see these people that have acres of land, and they can just run a wire through the trees for thousands of feet if they wanted to. So to be able to still do it on a normal size lot is very interesing. So you're using, I guess, was it random wire, or it's not random wire, right? It's tuned up.
I have some random wires out, but they're tuned through a tuning circuit that I have coming through a time wave noise canceling circuit that goes through a balancing switch. I switch into the SDR finally for when I want to lower noise or more gain on something, depending on the profile. And if I'm getting a sky wave that's dropping straight down, I might go to the sky to my mag loop, to kind of get some of that out of the way, because I do get a lot of skywave here with local AM.
Okay.
Some stuff I just can't null out because it's just too noisy.
Right. And can you break down, just for anybody who's listening that doesn't understand the difference between ground wave or skywave? Can you break through that?
Skywave is when you have a RF that comes that leaves a transmission site, goes up and comes right back down. It's like it's hard to aim away from it, with mag loops that move on a vertical base. And it's difficult for long wires to deal with because, of course, it's coming straight down, and you long wires work off the ends. and it becomes a real pain sometimes with some stations I get out here. You can't really complain about them because I have a love-hate relationship with a lot of broadcasters out here.
Okay.
And sometimes you run into guy. Well, because of the fact, a lot of them are noisy, and you can tell sometimes the engineer might not have everything tuned up 100% right. You can tell there might be just a little bit off. You can tell, look for center carry on some of these guys. They might be just off by a few hertz. And, you go from there. If that's screwy, then there's going to be a ballast off somewhere, and that's going to cause all this crazy noise that's causing my fans, my two fans that are in my window, to modulate with RF. I mean, I have to spin my mag loop away from my fans because they modulate the local radio station.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen those videos too. The guys take the grass and they touch it to the tower, and the grass starts to make noise as well.
Yeah,
interesting stuff when it comes to AM. So I guess you do a lot of that DXing as well, right? You hunt that out and see if you can pick out foreign or distant.
Yes,
AM stations.
At the end of the night, when I reach the end of the VHF, which means I haven't really picked up anything really cool, I'll flick over to the medium wave and I'll see what's happening. I've gotten stations as far as Cuba, but that's rare for me. Rare.
Okay.
From where I'm at, I got a Cuban station on medium wave once, and I haven't gotten any UK, which is kind of surprising. I get a lot of Canada, Toronto, and thereabouts, but I've medium wave DXing is pretty fun.
Have you checked out Lloyd Van Horn's YouTube channel at all? It's a DX.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I know he's into a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, he tips everybody off on Twitter on when the next DX tests are. I like to participate in those.
Nice. It ends up being a very small community, right? When you find out the same people who are into it with you. So that's good that you guys are able to pair up on that. And
those are fun, yeah.
Yeah, yep. So let's talk about basic equipment. Say somebody wants to get involved with this. What would you recommend? I mean, assume they don't have any equipment. Like, how would they get started doing what it is that you do on a very basic entry level setup?
I would send them to the one of those online SDR websites, and then get familiar with some of the audio, and then poking around and how to manipulate the graphic interface there, because it's not going to be much different than the SDR stuff that you're going to be having at home anyway. Get used to waterfalls and little viewports and picking different modes and things like that, different bandwidths. I mean, it's online stuff is going to be the same as what you're going to get in your SDR software anyway. So I'd recommend someone to start there.
So you basically go to web receivers or just get like SDR Sharp and just start looking at some of the global receivers they have in the SDR Sharp software.
Sure, yes, and SDR console as well. It's got a bunch of V3 console servers up. So there's the sky's the limit there. And when Russia first invaded Ukraine, I normally don't use other. I have this code that I have that I don't like to use other people's radios. It's just kind of like one of those things. If I can't receive it, then I'll just let somebody else worry about it, or I'll try to build some way, or figure out some way to build an antenna to receive it. But that's just too far. I was getting nothing. So I decided to, bite the bullet and kind of throw the code to the wayside and log into some receivers in Ukraine or whatever I could in that area, to kind of catch some of the firsthand action. And it was very interesting. So, I had to eat some of my own dog food there for a while.
Yeah, but you know what? You used it for like your own, scratch your itch, right? You weren't using it and parking yourself on there and tying up every night of the week either, right? I mean,
yeah.
And that's what it's there for. I mean, it's a resource for people to come in and use somebody else's radio. I mean, they're inviting you in basically to use their equipment. So, yeah, I know you like to keep it there for somebody else to use, but it is. I mean, what you're using to do a little bit of investigation, see what's out there. I mean, I'd give you a pass. I think you're perfectly fine doing that. So that's good. So it's kind of like you don't need to invest in it. You can get SDR console for free. I mean, I love that piece of software. I think it's great.
It's a low barrier to entry. As long as you can run it, you're good. You're going. Yep. You're up and off to the races. You don't even need a radio per se. Eventually the whole goal is to eventually get one, I guess. But I mean, even if you're encumbered by not having one, that's a great way to get started. I mean, that is the way to get started. And then you get a little hardware and it's off to the races. I mean, really, that's a no-brainer.
Right. So let's take it to the next level then. Let's get some hardware, right? What would you recommend and again, I think we're looking at like DC to daylight. It's such a huge thing because there's some things I want to go back to that I've starred here, but just in general reception of, I guess, just something to listen to. What would you recommend as basic hardware to invest in, and an antenna, and then the user interface?
Well, let's see. I would want to hear medium wave to satellite in as least amount of equipment as possible. So that would be one radio, if possible, one antenna, which is impossible.
Right.
But so there are units you can have where you have multiple radios, like, for example, the RSP Duo, which I use, and there are different units that have different radios in them, and that you can gang them up or split them up and have them sit on different bands. So that's one approach, and each have different antenna inputs, and you can have your own switching bay if you'd like. I have a switching bay here where I switch in and out different antennas and spin mag loops around. I have a stationary mag loop that I built on the side of a wall in my lab that nulls out an AM station. It's a broadside, and that was kind of a genius idea that I had and worked out quite well. I mean, actually, it functions as kind of a piece of art. It's nice. It's black wire that it's in a big loop that's like 10 by 8 by 10 that loops around multiple times, and I designed that to null out an AM station. It's just sitting on it's like on a wall.
It's hidden in plain sight, basically. You could say it's a piece. Yeah, nice, very cool.
You tap into it with a piece of wire, and you've created a filter, in a way. So I mean, that's this sort of weird thinking that you have when you kind of might be limited to space as well. Experimenting with loops. There's lots of loop stuff out there that you can get. That you can design, you can make on your own. There's instructions out there. You can make these on your own. You could buy them really, really cheaply and inexpensively and stick them up and have amazing results. And the mechanics of a mag loop are pretty amazing too. I mean, they have automatic noise nulling capabilities and directional. They're very directional and almost razor thin if you're lucky enough to get one that's engineered correctly. Mm-hmm. So I mean, mag loops are the way to go if you're constrained by space and you want to even try something, add another weapon to your arsenal, even to integrate that with a set of long wires and blend all your signals together. Use one as a noise source and use a noise blank or noise canceller. That's what I do. I have a huge array of noise antennas, noise references, and I have a noise canceller that I use to tune the noise out, with the incoming RF. So we have a different. So electronically it cancels the noise when the recombination happens after the diodes. Nice little trick of electronics.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's when you know what you're doing, you could be very dangerous, right? Well, not dangerous, but it's when everything clicks, right? Really, when you really understand it, it's amazing what you can do with very, very primitive and simple technology. Basically, when it comes down to it, right? Because it's a wire.
And there's so much to it, and on all the knowledge is all out there already. I mean, the hams have already made it out there for us, put it out there for us, and it's already out there. There's nothing really new, except we're talking about storage now. Battery is going to be really great here pretty soon, but I mean, we've miniaturized antennas a lot, and now we need to work on eliminating noise.
Yeah, well, the noise is just going to keep continuing to more electronic devices we have out there.
Yeah, that may turn into a political thing. That's a whole nother rant for maybe a whole nother day that I'm not even prepared to talk about. But
yeah, no problems.
And politically, I mean, there's a whole thing you can do to lobby the Underwriters Laboratory and all the politicians that deal with that crap, and allowing crappy components come from other countries that aren't tested and leak this crappy RF. Oh, it just makes me nuts. I've expended so much money into eliminating RF. Oh,
and it's everywhere. It's in your compact fluorescent light fixtures. It's in the cheap wall warts. It's broadband over power lines. It's even in your car with the alternator and everything else. I mean, there's just noise everywhere. So it's something that we've got to kind of learn to live with and deal with. But at the same time, too, you're right. The more stuff they bring in and with the least amount of filtering and the having it designed cheaply and efficiently versus have the giant heavy power supplies, because the phones come with the smaller ones and they're cheaper to manufacture. You're right. It's a trade-off. And
I've noticed the noise floor in my neighborhood has gone up about 10 dB in the past couple of years. So, I mean, in general, there's just noise everywhere. You're right. You can't get away from it.
And it's even in the electrical system too, right? Like I said, BPL, right? Broadband over power lines. But even in the transformers, when you get a bad ground to nose, forget it. It could completely wipe out HF for you. Luckily, many department or utilities have, or should have, at least a guy who's on the payroll that understands that they've got to fix the grounding issue and keep their emissions down. But just going out there and finding it, it's not their job to find it per se. It's more or less they get tipped off by other people who they're inconveniencing. And we're the ones that tip them off and say, hey, this pole is got something coming from it, is really what it comes down to. And I know guys that do that. And,
there are dudes that go out do that, yeah.
Yep, and they've got a lot of great success. And even that, I mean, as simple as walking around with, I had a coworker of mine who was borrowing my ICOM, was it ICR 10 or something like that? And he would just walk around the neighborhood with it. And then eventually he started building his own, it was some sort of receiver that he built. And it was able to, with an antenna, he was able to just, like RDF it basically. He had a directional antenna and something that he was putting together that allowed him to do that in a miniature box. And that's what he continues to do with it. But the guy's big into contesting and doing like 40 meters, 80 meters CW. And when the noise floor gets high, he's not happy because he can't make his DX contests.
Right.
So,
yeah.
But yeah, so we got one radio, and again, you said a RPDX, right?
I don't use an RSP duo. It's got two radios in the thing. You can split it up and have it do. You can put it in different modes and have it monitor like ADSB, or you can split out another radio even if you wanted. Or use it in diversity mode. Play one radio off the other, and it picks the best. Combines and picks the best IQ and gives you the best signal after.
And again, those are a bit pricier, but again, it's a different receiver than you get off of like one of those thumb drives or the little USB sticks, right?
Yes. Now those are great to start with.
Yeah,
those are great to start with, and you can get some real crummy ones that are rip-offs and not the real ones. But those are great too to have around. But the problem with those is I'll have those for like a week until I'll drop them and step on them, or pop them out of the slot, or they'll blow up because too much gain. I mean, just work on gains, all into gains. So, those are great things to have, though. But I've blown those up left and right, and God bless them for what they've done. But they are great little units too, and those are great little units to go. And my progression into SDRs was half a dozen of those thumbsticks, and I picked up the SDR IQ from Peter Eibling's out there. He makes an SDR. He makes antennas now.
Okay.
But anyway, that was my graduation. I started with the thumbsticks. I picked up an SDR IQ for a couple $100, and I went into net SDR for like over $1,000, and I really never looked back. I pick up these little bitty, about the size of a cigarette pack or so, like the RSP Duo and the RSP 1A and these type of things, which is real nice. The 1A is real nice. I use that for HF and medium wave mostly, and the Duo I use for above HF. Like for my for the military, for mil air stuff and local stuff like that, and satellite.
Excellent. So it's not just like we were talking about. It's not just HF stuff. It's not just medium wave, long wave, and all that stuff that you're finding, right? But there are some interesting things you've found on there. So let's talk about some of the unpublished or the oddball stations that you've been picking up, and then we'll work our way up the dial. Let's go that way with it. Let's start with the low bands, and we'll make our way up to satellite, because again, I've got that circled here because I want to make sure we talk about that one. So let's start low. What is it? What are some of the things that you've picked up that surprised you, or
something anomalously low? Let me think about that for a moment. I'd say I've heard pirates down as low as 1640, 1650, 1700, 1710.
And then pirates are basically just unlicensed
broadcasters. Yeah. Yes.
And how do you know they're pirates? They basically say, I'm a pirate.
There's a station there that you not have heard before. You hit Google and see who's broadcasting on 1710 right now. Right. And you would spin the antenna, maybe get a rough direction of it, and maybe check someone else's radio, maybe ask somebody else if they have something, or you can pretty much deduct it. If you get a station ID and it's a legitimate station, well, then they might be, if it's from somewhere else, you wait for a station ID, usually on the hour or 30 minutes after the hour, wait for some kind of station ID or local commercial. That's the tip off.
Right.
Or any kind of commercial. I mean, pirate's not going to really put a commercial on there. That defeats the purpose of being a pirate.
Right.
I mean, conceptually.
Right. And
unless they're going to rebroadcast the station. There are some pirates that will just rebroadcast other stations. Maybe test their own equipment, or as like a tribute.
Okay. And again, a lot of these pirates are just basically transmitting out of their homes or some location with just a...
Yeah, now there's one guy, Yahweh Radio, he was rumored to have put a remote transmitter somewhere, and it would, this is a number of years ago, the story had it, that he would tape the microphone, and the recording would just continue to loop and loop and loop until the battery ran out. And he did that at a remote location. Well, this guy is usually on 7475 Yahweh Radio. I have yet to hear him, but he's legendary. That's one of those catches I haven't heard. I'm going to. It's just a matter of time.
Gotcha. Interesting. So it's basically, somebody else's hobby, basically. It's an illegal hobby, right? But they're out there and they are broadcasting. But there's a big following too. I mean, that's the thing. A lot of people go out there and they want to log the pirates and listen to them, and they do have a following. I mean, it's a really interesting part of listening to that part of the radio spectrum.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I'm a huge fan. There's broadcasters I'm a fan of. You get to be on a first name basis with some of these guys after a time. They'll call you out on the show. You leave reception reports for them, and they send reception reports back, or you'll talk to them in a chat room somewhere online, or talk to them via email, or sometimes like a DJ Dick, we gave his phone number last week, so you can, there's different ways these guys are reaching out. The medium is changing rapidly before us.
Excellent. All right. We're going to take a quick pause from the conversation right now and stop for a quick break. Now, again, anybody who's a Patreon supporter at the $3 or higher level, doesn't get this break, and we'll continue right on with this conversation. For everybody else, we'll catch you in just 1 second. All right. So what else are you hunting out if we go more up the dial?
Right now, I have been listening to Russians in the Baltic testing out radar. That's been very fun. I hear the radar mostly now, but last week propagation was great. I heard them. I heard voice and I heard full duplex communications, and that was just a blast replaying that. But that's my latest thing, and that's not necessarily piratey, but it is kind of anomalous in the fact that it's in the middle of a band that's used for aircraft that communicate to air traffic controllers as they cross the Atlantic Ocean. So they're not interfering with anything, but it's like very close to them. So anybody looking at an SDR would visually see, the smears on the waterfall from these Russians as they're talking on their boats, as they're testing the different radar suites.
And you don't speak,
presumably,
right? And you don't speak Russian, right? So how would you know that that's who you were listening to?
Well, I mean, I've been doing this long enough to know the difference between different languages. I mean, I know Russian sounding language,
right? But
definitely wasn't Spanish.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying, how do you know that that's what they were doing? Is kind of like my question. Like, how do you know they would set up the radar? I mean, how would you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, that's a very. I don't want to go Alex Jones on here with that one. I mean, presumably that's the conversation. There was talking, and then they might have been even testing out jamming equipment, because there would be communications and then loud brap noises that would go on with different kind of frequencies throughout the night. Okay. Actually, this happened for several weeks. I'd record this every night and then review the recordings before I went to work in the morning.
All right. So I was kind of like, wondering if it sounded the same as other over the horizon radars that you've heard before.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So that's how you kind of figure out that that's who it was, between the same sound as something you already knew, plus Russian sounds like. So
that makes sense. That's a bit of a minor study as well as radar, different types of radar. So while it did kind of sound like jamming as well, the characteristics of radar are similar to jamming anyway. So I mean, it's not a stretch.
Gotcha. No, I'm just asking for somebody that's tuning around the dial and they go, what am I listening to?
Right, yeah.
I mean, how does somebody who's never listened to before know this is something interesting to be listening to, and they should make note of, like, this was something that I'm never going to hear again versus something I can hear every night of the week. So, but again, you have to know the landscape, I guess, to kind of see that as well.
Yeah. Hanging out long enough and baselining the environment enough to know that is definitely not a usual thing to hear right here in this very spot, because like I say, I got a big scope open every night, and I just like obsessively view it. And when a little blip pops up on the screen, I hit the record and I see what this thing is, and I try to reverse it as much as I can to find out what's happening. And
that's the beauty too about SDR, right? Is you can record a whole lot of data in with one button push. I mean, you can everything you receive basically. You can go in and then replay the recording and tune it like it's a DVR and tune around the spectrum that you were receiving. So,
unfortunately, we're not at the exact point yet where you can replay it immediately. That's next gen, and we are going to have that, but it's not going to happen right away. I mean, I would like to be able to replay the last 2 minutes of something like right now. Just flip over to another band and replay the last 2 minutes of whatever transpired. That'd be great. That doesn't exist right now, but it will.
Okay.
So I mean, it will happen. But now we can record but there's a slight, the slight abstraction of having to actually go and now retrieve this recording and then put it through the software and replay it and find where you want to scrub to. So I mean, there is a slight complication, but soon I believe this will go away. You'll be able to just scroll right back with a mouse instead of having to go back into like the file system and replay something by clicking it. You'll be able to just scroll.
Yeah, that's what I was getting to. Right, when I said DVR, that's what I meant. Not so much hit rewind like a TiVo and recatch the last 30 seconds. But yeah, that would be I'm sure that would just destroy our hard drive, though. Just constantly recording all that data and re-recording it.
I'm used to that. Sure. I go through a laptop a year. I try to get some medium to intermediate range stuff, but I run it all the time, and it just USB buses are just completely just saturated as much as they can be saturated.
So you're not, when you say you're doing it on a professional level, you're not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not kidding. In other words, I haven't updated, the paradigm in a while. I really need to get racks. I had racks, but I moved from San Diego to here, and that idea kind of changed.
That's what always happens. It's part of the hobby, though, right? I mean, it gives you something to do to improve or test around with or everything else, right? It's just natural progression of what it is that the hobby can do. So, all right, so let's continue our way up the dial. So we've got pirates, we've got Russians. What else do we have out there?
Oh, well, here's a fun little one. I was working from home, and so I mean, I had, how many radios do you think I had on that day?
Every single one of them.
I mean, I was out of control. And everything I had recorded, I put up on the Internet Archive. So if anybody wanted to go look that up, it'd be McRadioface on Internet Archive, and I put everything I had from January 6th up on the archive. There is one interesting recording that I have, and since you mentioned interesting things, I had heard rumors that that these crazy white insurrectionists were going to come up the highway in a caravan with all their guns and their radios and coordinate all our stupid movements on their ham radios. So what I did is I camped out, on 2 meters for a week before, and I had completely baselined the entire 2 meter spectrum with thousands of anytime there was a blip, I would make a mark of it and make a note of it. And just in case, to keep an eye on it in the future. They're calling for this thing. Something's supposed to happen on the 6th. And I said, well, my backyard is a radio backyard, man. And I didn't hear any of that, but I heard, I heard some people coordinating, getting gas, hopping off the freeway and getting gas. But that was about it. And
so nothing exciting. With
nothing
that.
exciting at all, but It was still tremendous fun to do.
Mm-hmm.
Tremendous fun to do. And I heard when they were taking, I don't know if I can tell this story. I probably shouldn't tell this story. I've heard very, very informal communications in a time of crisis when people might let their guard down for a moment, and you hear, like a very human kind of thing, and sometimes you kind of get taken aback. And during the BLM riots, I didn't upload any of that to Internet Archive, but boy, oh boy, I heard when the HRT helicopter guys were out there, the FBI, when they were rotor washing everybody out in the streets, I had ADSB up and I was watching all that happen. I was watching drones before anybody else had reported. I had noticed on my ADSB that there were 2 MQ-4 drones in the sky.
Very neat.
During the BLM riots and also on January 6th. So somebody was still in charge on January 6th running drones in the sky.
Right.
And I don't know who's doing it during the BLM stuff out here, but I saw it, and then everybody else kind of picked it up.
It's amazing.
That's the kind of stuff that you see. That's right. The stuff I see. I don't know if that's anomalous or not, but boy, oh boy, it sure is interesting.
But it still is interesting. Exactly right. And it's not something that you find in a database that says, hey, go tune here and look for this. I mean, ADSB, yes, right. You know what frequency to be on. But again, a lot of that stuff is, you're not going to find it on some websites because they filter out a lot of that kind of data.
Yeah, and that's another one of my beefs with all that stuff. They don't have to do that. And there's going to come a time where people maybe not like myself. I built it, I'll give it out, at will when I want to, but man, sharing it just gets you in trouble. So, there's going to be a cadre of people who do eventually share this stuff apart from these third-party websites making money off our backs. Literally, that's what they're doing, I think.
Right.
Right. People contribute their ADSB logs to these, and they're filtering that crap out, and they're still making money off your back, and we're not getting the full picture. Give me that full picture, man. Don't hold back. That's what I want.
Right.
That's one of the reasons why I do radio. Before Montgomery County went encrypted, this is right about the time they went to full encryption. They were testing encryption on their trunking systems. And Montgomery County Police went full encryption. So at the time of that switchover, things were getting hot and heavy. And I had recordings of, dudes in the back of squad cars, cussing out cops. And it was the most amazingly funny stuff too, because, there's a lot of folks were emboldened by being protected by, the media and a certain ruling class that was allowing this to happen. And they were wholesale getting away with it. And I couldn't believe it. And I was hearing it on the radio firsthand. It's one of the most exciting things I ever heard in my life.
Right. Raw and unfiltered.
Raw and unfiltered, and you're not going to get that. You won't get that anywhere else, man. You have to get a radio and listen to it for yourself.
Exactly. All right, so let's keep moving up the dial before we run out of time, because we're getting close to an hour, actually, believe it or not. And I want to keep going up the dial. So we're sitting around VHF, UHF right now. I guess around, with the trunk systems, around 700, 800, depending on what frequencies you guys run on. So let's continue up from here. I want to make sure, again, we talk about satellites, because this is really interesting as well. Let's talk about receiving and what you've heard, or what you do when you receive satellites and the setup for that. Because again, the antenna you're using for satellite reception isn't the same as you're using for long wave and medium wave. I mean, completely different.
No, it's definitely not.
Ball game.
The wave sizes are different, so they require a different kind of technology to absorb. And this requires a smaller antenna with a different kind of gain signature around it to allow it to resonate at these higher frequencies. So, I've got these Black Knight antennas outside, and I got a homebrew Yagi that I use to point at different satellites as the need arises. And typically, I will listen to Brazilian pirates using satellites. Going back from trunking up to 700, back down to like 200 or so. Listen to like a Fleet Satcom, listening to Brazilians, talking about their exploits on open transponders.
And it's amazing they're still there, right? They're on what, I forget what they were, 200 and what was it?
250, 240-ish?
252, right? Something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And it's amazing because you don't even need, you just go outside with your radio and a whip antenna, and that's all you need.
Yeah.
Yep. But these guys,
pretty amazing
they're
stuff.
well known for that. Yeah.
All day long.
Yeah.
And I listen to this, probably the same guys in their fishing boats on HF.
Right.
Same guys, different gear. Pretty amazing.
Yep. Exactly. So do you, if you keep going through satellite stuff too, do you talk about like 1.2 gig, the satellite system that's up in that neck of the woods, or do you venture that high with this stuff?
I've gone as far as Inmarsat. That was a long time ago. I had a dish that I had before I moved to this area, and that's no longer. Nothing anomalous up there really, other than maybe some video stuff that was interesting to reverse, but that was a very long time ago. And not a whole lot of, stuff up there right now at this time. But I mean, there really isn't a whole lot of anomalous things up there other than there's a lot of radar up there. A lot of radar sweeps in this area because of this area. I'm near Andrews and in the White House and all that crap.
Right.
So they have all kinds of air stuff happening.
Exactly. I know there's like the J-Arrow and some other maritime GPS coordinates being passed along. Though was that I forget the name of the satellite system now, Inmarsat or Iridium.
Yes, Iridium. Yeah.
Yeah, but again, it's pretty much a known frequency, and you just kind of tune around in that spot, and you'll be able to pick up what it is you want to pick up. So again, it's a well published type of system, but
yeah, there's a lot to it, and there's a lot of voice up there too, and the gear is it's not incredibly hard to cobble together, but it is at that frequency. It's it's precision stuff. You got to be more or less precise with certain things up there. So,
yep. But again, it's still equipment you can buy off of Amazon. I mean,
for sure, yeah.
I mean, these antennas are so small; they ship them in like in a 4x4 box almost. So, and that's inches, not feet. So and they suction cup to your window. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, the only thing you need to do is I think you need to run power to it to power up with the preamps in there. But other than that, I mean, it's pretty much point at the sky and tune around, and you'll start picking up something, or at least seeing something on the waterfall. So there's definitely stuff to pick up. So I know we did a lot of talking about about SDRs, and that's primarily, I guess, what you're using. Is there any other? And you said you had a 436 and
I got,
stuff,
yeah,
but
I'm sorry, the 536. I got the Bearcat unit in 536, which blew me away in terms of how they revamped the infrastructure of how to do
interesting,
scanning.
right?
Yeah, because for how many decades since day one we were going from 0 to whatever number we wanted, and not having this flexibility of having databases, man. And Upman was just a genius. May he rest in peace.
That's a result, I believe, of like the community. I don't want to say outrage, but the community feedback on what happened with the Home Patrol. Right? Everybody's like, well, you got the Home Patrol, and it's a good idea, but we want our scanners on top of it. Like we want a 996 with the Home Patrol, and then that gave birth to the 536.
Yeah.
In my mind. So it's really cool the way they were able to take something that we were familiar with as far as keys and buttons, but keep that whole Home Patrol back end on it, which is nice, because again, if you're traveling, or if grandma gets a new scanner to listen to the local police department, and all she wants to do is put her zip code in, that satisfies that itch. But for those of us that want more out of the Home Patrol, right, that 536 was a nice upgrade to get. So
when I was in my 20s, I used to rock a Pro 2004 from Radio Shack. And
I got one right here on my shelf.
And my girlfriend lived at the time, and her home base was in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles. And we used to drive up there every weekend. And I'd take my scanner and I have to reprogram it every weekend to listen to their police.
Yeah. You go through one enter, two enter, right? So
yeah, beep 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 beep. So I got a hole worn off in the that little keyboard,
right?
Enter button.
Yeah,
it's worn off.
But it's still a very popular scanner, though. It's still and Bill Cheek did a good job selling that one, though, too. He's
that's
another
my guy.
Yeah,
when I was doing scanners, that's right, man. He's my guy right there. When he first got on the internet, I knew of him, and I emailed him immediately, and we were bosom buddies practically. I was showing him the internet, and we talked about radio. So he gave me my first real tips on how to deal with this Radio Shack stuff, and I got all the Bill Cheek. I got all the Bill Cheek mods.
Nice.
Another guy who can rest in peace, man. This guy, there was very, very few people in a handful of people in the annals of RF history that have changed things the way these guys have, and
yep. So excellent. Well, anything else you want to bring up this evening or today as we talk through just searching around the bands and finding weird stuff to listen to?
No, I'd say, thanks for your time and thanks for what you're doing, getting the word out there. Diversify and get the word out on the web. But radio is a real fun thing to do. Radios are everywhere. We've got 1 million of them in our cell phones. Our computers communicate with radios over Wi-Fi. They're just everywhere. Might as well use them and see what they're all about. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of fun to be had, and you can do tremendous. And it's all about gaining knowledge about what's happening around you. When I listen to radios, man, I feel free as a bird. I feel like there's nothing that I can't learn, or nothing that I can't figure out or get an insight into using a radio. Anyway, so thank you very much. So props to you and all the homebrew guys out there and all the HF guys out there for making that stuff happen. It's just, it's my thing.
Excellent. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to, if they have any questions about what it is you do, or they want to just pick your brain a little bit more, what's the best way for somebody to get a hold of you?
At McRadioface on Twitter, or let's see, McRadioface@gmail.com.
Excellent. All right. So we'll put those in the session notes as well. So again, Mr. Anonymous, Mr. McRadioface, I want to say thank you very much for coming on the podcast today. Again, this podcast was your idea, so I want to thank you for reaching out to me over Twitter and then booking this session right now to record this podcast episode. So again, thank you very much for stepping up and being a guest on the podcast today.
All right, thank you for your time, Phil.
Thank you, Mr. McRadioface, for reaching out to me via Twitter and having this conversation with us for the podcast. It was extremely interesting to hear how you've set up your receivers and your antennas so that you could pick up everything that is going on around you. So obviously, a lot of what you're listening to And a lot of your success has to do with your proximity to Washington, D.C. But we've heard from other podcast guests that any city or town can have this kind of excitement and radio traffic because all it takes is one event and your town can be front page news or national headlines for a day, a week, or even a month. So the takeaway here is to be prepared. Understand the RF landscape around you. Understand who you'll typically hear on the radio. Understand what talk groups you may typically see or hear or maybe not hear on a trunk radio system. Understand the federal layout. Understand, right, what happens through ADSB, and maybe even roll your own virtual radar so you can see what's coming in unfiltered, right? These are all being prepared and knowing what is around you. So get on it. Throw your radio into search. Grab a software-defined radios and physically see the spectrum that is around you. If you want to learn more about software-defined radios, I have a free course that you can take that will get you started in just a weekend over at courses.scannerschool.com. So again, if you want to reach out to Radio McRadioface, you can find him over on Twitter with the handle of @McRadioface. And as a reminder, I'm always looking for podcast guests because, again, these conversations are exciting. I love them. I'm sure you enjoy listening to somebody else on the podcast besides myself from time to time. And I'm sure you have a story that you may want to share with us. So if you go to scannerschool.com/guest, you can fill out the calendar. We'll email you a Zoom meeting link. And the rest is, I guess you could say, history, I guess, right? So with that, as a reminder, I'm looking for more questions for our upcoming Ask Scanner School podcast release, which happens on the first Tuesday of every month. You can go right now and pick up your phone and dial 516-308-2885 or by going to scannerschool.com/ask and use either the SpeakPipe link or the standard text-based email entry form that is right there. And let me know what you think about this podcast episode. You can go over to our Discord server and be a part of the conversation with your fellow scanner nerds. That's the community. The Scannerds. Go to scannerschool.com/discord to get your personal invitation to our Scannerds community. Before we wrap up this week's podcast, I want to take a minute here to thank all of our Patreon supporters. Alan Gonzalez, Arthur Altrak, Arthur Heron, Bill Kay, Bob Rops, Bob Milton, Brandon Sammons, Brian King, Chris Paris, Craig Harper, Dan, Dave Dombrowski, Dave Pasco, David C., Danny Crotty, Dylan Hyder, Ed Walsh, Edward Bramlett, Glenn Wright, Greg Johnson, Guy Lee, I Hate Junk Mail, Jack Haycock, Jacques Berry, James Broxton, James Felling, Jay Reed, Jeff Block, Jeff Chapman, Jeff McLeod, Jenny Taylor, Jim B., Jim Heinrich, Joe Curtis, Joe P., John Corduff, John Sheldon, John Keel, John Sweeney, John Goldenberg, Joshua Robb, Ken Newberry, Kenneth Fowler, Kevin Zwicky, Lenny Bauer, Les Stevenson, Lloyd R., Mark Beebe, Michael Gorman, Michael Kroger, Michael Meadows, Mike Lopez, Mike Piltz, Nicholas Stenger, Paul Teal, Randy Lee Wright, Raymond Hill, Rich Palmieri, Ronnie Bach, Sal Marandola, Scott Lefgren, Terry Wright, Tim Mazet, TJ, Todd Glendy, and William Arkand. Find out more about Patreon and our support tiers by visiting scannerschool.com/Patreon. Thanks again for listening. We'll catch you again next week. 73.